Hi, Tracy. How are you? Welcome to Dare Me to Prosper.
Thank you. I enjoy being here.
Yeah, I'm so excited that you're here. I have mentioned you many times on the podcast and have sung praises about your work and had two different sessions with you. So I just love your work and I love what you do. I think it's so impactful. So I'm just glad you're here. Would you like to start out by telling us kind of just who you are and what you do, and you tell us the proper phrase, because I feel like I sometimes I stumble over my words. I'm like, what's the technical term for this?
Well, I call my method soul mapping hypnosis method or technique. And what I do is I guide people through past life regression, life between life regression. So, what they do in between lives when they're not in a physical body. And then we connect to their higher self under hypnosis. And the goal isn't just when we do the past life portion to just look at past lives, it's really more healing focused. Of course, it's fun and we get to see all kinds of really cool past lives, but when someone accesses deeper levels of their consciousness, they often uncover the emotional roots of patterns in their lives. So, like fears, relationship cycles, health issues, self worth struggles, why they maybe struggle with rejection or abandonment. And when those roots can be clearly seen, that's when something can shift in them.
Yeah. Oh, it's so cool. And I've experienced a little bit of that myself in my sessions, and just like old childhood wounds and healing that needed to be done and stuff that I was carrying with other people that I just would have no idea about, or I wouldn't have thought about it that way. And so all the healing that you did in that session was just tremendously impactful. I just, now looking back, I'm like, wow, I didn't know. Like, just having that knowing, like, even with all the like psychic surgery and things that you did, having that knowing moving forward, like, totally remapped my whole mind around like how to look at those situations. So,
Yeah, I often will ask in a session to my client's higher self, I'll say, well, how would she have known this information had she not done this session? And I'm surprised sometimes people might be really disappointed to hear the higher self say, well, she wouldn't have.
yeah. And there's something that I have to say that's so special about it, because, like, I meditate often and I connect with my higher self and I do all these things, but there's something different about having a session with you and having you, A, knowing what you're doing, and two, just like you asking the questions and kind of knowing what questions to ask, that allows me to like kind of just be fully in the space of connecting with my higher self and not trying to be the one who's asking questions and receiving questions. So I found that really helpful, because there's just something totally different about like working with you and your background knowledge and knowing what to ask and knowing how so many of the sessions go and how the higher self typically responds to things. I've just, that makes a big difference. So I wanted to mention that. Do you want to share like how you got into this line of work, or like what got it
Sure,
started?
sure. But let me just touch on what you said really
Oh yeah.
quickly. So I tell people before we go into that meditative or hypnotic state, don't try to make anything make sense before you give me an answer. Excuse me. We really want the brain, the human brain, to be out of the process.
Mm,
This is really getting in touch with your soul. And the higher self, I say, is like the voice box of your soul. It's kind of the intermediary between your soul and your human consciousness. That's my job. I will ask enough clarifying questions so things start to make more sense. I don't need the client to do that. I really just want them to be the mouthpiece, just channeling the first thing that comes to their mind, the first knowing, the first feeling that they get. Because I've had enough practice in doing over 1,000 sessions to know now how to really guide us to the place where you're going to be. And sometimes you might think, oh, I feel like I'm a female, but then later on, it might shift and you say, no, actually, I think I'm a male. And that's totally fine, because sometimes you do start out with more of your human mind. And once you get into that relaxed state, then you kind of, I guess I'll just say, flow into it, and you're into that more feeling and more knowing. So I love it that you said that you don't have to use your thinking mind, because I really don't want you to be doing that.
yeah, yeah. And I totally recognize that too. It's like in the beginning, it feels more like thinking, but then the
Mhm.
further and further you get into it, it's just like, oh, it's just coming out. Like, I really don't have to think about it, unless I'm just trying to focus on like, wait, what am I actually seeing? I'm not having to like think. The hardest part is the beginning. And I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but in the first session that I did with you a couple years ago, and going into a past life and seeing like these alien hands, and your brain wants to go, there is no way.
Right.
Completely making this up. I mean, this is my imagination. But I'm like, okay, well, we're just going to go with it. I'm just going to tell you like the first thing I see, the first thing it comes to mind. And then it's like, as things go on, you realize like it comes full circle and everything I saw actually made sense. And there was an answer for exactly why we saw what we saw. And it's just like, oh, that's how I know it wasn't just like me making stuff up, because
Right.
I never would have even connected those dots. It just made sense by the time it was all like said and done. So yes, that it's so funny to experience something, especially one that's like really wild like that.
Yes. Yeah.
It just
I
goes to
tell
show
people,
that, yeah.
I'm like, I'm like, so if you look, if I say look down and tell me what you see, and you see 3 green hairy toes, I don't want you to second guess yourself and say, oh, that can't be right. I'm not going to tell Tracy that. Let me conjure up another image in my mind. I want you to tell me what you're seeing, because if something doesn't make sense to you, it might make beautiful, perfect sense to me. But
Right.
you're
Yeah.
trying to anticipate if it's making sense to your mind, but you haven't done these sessions before, and most people have never done anything like this. And if it doesn't make sense to me, I will ask questions to clarify it and build it out and determine if we're actually seeing what I think we might be seeing, another, let's call it alien life,
Yeah.
or if it's just something that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense and we need to kind of shift directions a little bit. But I tell everyone, just tell me what you're seeing, feeling, thinking, hearing. I got the rest. That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Oh, yeah, and you're so good at it too. Do you want to really quickly walk us through kind of like the process? Like first we do this, first we do that. In case, yeah, because I feel like that might help people understand like, well, what does it look like when you actually go in and meet with you? Like, what's that like?
Yeah, so I have a couple of different ways. My deep dive session, that's my primary type of session. It's broken into 2 parts, and we can do it all in one day, and it's kind of a full day. These are not short sessions, but we can do it all in one day, or a lot of people prefer to kind of split it out between 2 days, or I do evening appointments too, just, so people don't have to miss work to do this if they can't get away.
Mm-hmm.
But for part 1, it's an intake session. So just imagine if I'm not a licensed therapist, but if you were going to go to a therapy session, they want to know your whole background. They want to know kind of your story. So same with me. I want to know your background, your story, what brought you here. And even if you think something might not be relevant, when I'm listening to your story, I'm finding all kinds of things that are relevant, because what's happening in your life now usually goes back to things that happened in childhood. And at this point, we don't know what's connected to a past life or another life, since there's really no such thing as time. But we're looking at patterns where you might have adopted a certain belief. Were you bullied in school growing up? Did you grow up with a narcissistic parent, a narcissistic sibling? Were you well adjusted? Did you have trouble because mom and dad were always fighting in the house? Like, kind of what was that like, and what kind of beliefs and vows did you make growing up as a result of your environment?
Yeah.
Or maybe you grew up in a really religious environment, and that really shaped who you are and how your life ended up. So I'm looking for not only what the person says, but what they don't say. And I'm looking for any emotion that might come up. And it's surprising, because sometimes people will start getting really emotional talking about a particular thing that happened to them growing up. And they're like, wow, I thought I healed this already. I can't believe I'm having this emotional reaction. And that right there signals to me that it's not healed. It was probably just tucked away somewhere so they could just keep functioning. But we're going to definitely dig into that and bring that up. So in the intake session, I'm doing some intuitive coaching and teaching with my client. I'm sharing some stories, maybe something from another session that relates to what they're going through, and doing a lot of what I call digging. So I combine something called theta healing along with my hypnosis. And theta healing, it's a separate thing that I also teach, but theta healing also inside my sessions is where we really dig in and try to find the root of something. So I'll have the client close their eyes sometimes and be like, well, let's feel into this a little bit more and see what's underneath that anger or underneath that unforgiveness you're holding towards mom, and find out what the root is, because we want in the session to go in and heal it from the root, because otherwise it's just going to keep coming up again. So anyway, the intake, my clients often say that during the intake session, they get a tremendous shift in their thinking and a lot of healing just in the intake. So that's part one. That's usually 2.5 to 3 hours. Part two, that's the hypnosis part, or I like to call the deep meditation. I'll give you some mind quieting tools to use so that if that doubting, disbelieving part of you starts to rear its head during your session, you've got some tools to work with.
And those are so helpful, I must say.
Yeah, thank you.
I still use
Um,
them.
yeah. Some people use them a lot and some people don't really need to reference them. But then I'll guide you into meditation and we'll land in another life. We can call it a past life. And sometimes it's on Earth. I would say probably about 75 to 80% are Earth lives. Probably another 10% are non-physical, where the person is not in a physical state. And then the other 15-ish percent is our alien lives, which you experienced 2 of those.
That's so funny. I was like, I would have thought maybe the aliens would be a little bit more because both of mine were like non-human.
Mhm.
So yeah, that really surprises me.
Well,
But
I think it's that way with me versus some other practitioners who really have a more alien past life focus, because
okay.
I set the intention and say in the meditation, in the script that I use, that we're going to look at another life that's relevant to their current life. So
Okay.
it's relevant in some way. Maybe there's some leftover lessons or karma or some kind of relationship, but it's relevant to their current life. And there is always a relevancy or a message or something that comes through once we connect to the higher self. We see the relevancy. But knowing the background of my client, usually when the past life is going on, the relevancy is screaming at me. I can
Yeah,
totally
you're
see
like, I know
it.
where this is going.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it was so interesting in mine. I definitely like hearing what the higher self was saying about how it was relevant. It was not only relevant, but it was relevant to like that specific point in time, like that week, that month, that year of like what I was going through. So I found that really interesting as well. And again, it was just stuff that like I wouldn't have you think you're going to make stuff up, and it's like once you get into the flow you really are just like receiving information, and even if it's ideas that you're familiar with, at least for me it was like, oh, like I know, I know what you're talking about, but I never would have framed it this way, or I never would have like made these connections, but they were just so relevant to that point in time, which I just think is fascinating too. Like it's not like, oh yeah, this explains something. I mean, it might, I guess it explained something years ago, but it was also just very applicable to like I can apply this right now.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So, in it, let's just assume it's a non-alien life, and it's just a normal human life. I'll just use that as our example here, since that's the majority of the cases. So, I'll look at we'll develop the scene, and you'll actually be really feeling yourself there. Usually feeling yourself there. Once in a while, the client is more like an observer of that life, but I really try to get them to embody it so they feel like they're more there. And I will tell you, 90% of my clients end up having emotional reactions at some point during their session, usually crying, body shakes,
Wow.
tremors, just anything. So to me, that shows me, and I tell my clients, you're going to feel like you're really there. You really will feel like you're really there. And an image that my higher self showed me a number of years ago when I kind of was asking my higher self, what's really going on when we do these sessions? And I don't know if you know what a Venn diagram is. You have those 2 circles that kind of cross over each other and they overlap those 2 circles.
Yeah.
So one side of the circle my higher self showed me was this non-physical or the spirit realm, and the other circle was the physical. And where those 2 circles overlap and you've got that little gap in there where they're completely overlapped, my higher self said, that's where you and your client are.
Oh, that's cool. I
Yeah,
really like
you're
that visual.
you're overlapping between the physical and the non-physical, and that's where you
Yeah.
are. So when we do these sessions, we lose track of time. So I completely lose, I have to keep watching my clock because I completely lose track of time. And you probably know from your experience, you might think, and I often ask my clients, how long do you think you were under? And they'll be like, oh, it felt like 20 minutes, maybe an
Yeah.
hour.
Oh,
And I'm
yeah.
like, how about 3 hours?
Yeah. I think my first session we went 4 hours and I was like, there is no way. Yeah, yeah. It's amazing how that happens.
Yeah, totally lose track of time because we're in a place where there is no time. And
Yeah.
so that's why. And so my days fly by. If I do the whole, 6 hour session in one day, we take a nice long lunch break in between if we do it all in one day, but my day is just gone. It's like it was morning and now it's evening and I'm like, where did it go? But
Yeah.
so looking at that in between, oh, so I lead them through several events in that past life, several significant events.
Hmm.
So maybe they see, themselves getting married, and then they see themselves having a child, and then they see, or maybe they see themselves receiving some kind of award or a war happening or a raid or something like that. And then the third event, we look at a third event, and then I bring them to tell me what's happening now that we are just moments before you take your last breath in that lifetime. And they'll often describe either an injury or they're old or they're sick. In some way, they're ready to take their last breath, and it might be expected, it might be unexpected to their human self. And I'll ask them questions like, what are you thinking as you're getting ready to pass from this life? Then I will pull them forward to, okay, now you've taken your last breath, and imagine yourself hovering maybe 6 to 10 feet above your body. Like if you're up at the ceiling looking down, how do you feel now that you've left that life and you're no longer in that body? So we get that perspective. And once that's done, I say, okay, what are you going to do now? Are you going to hang around with the body or are you going to go someplace
Hmm.
else? If they hang around with the body for a while, I stay curious and I ask questions about that. Once in a while, the person kind of stays earthbound for a little while, which is
Interesting.
interesting,
Yeah.
very interesting. But let's just go with the quote unquote norm here. And they describe themselves being like almost like sucked upward or taken upward, and they find themselves in a really peaceful place normally. So from there, any number of things can happen. But again, let's go with kind of the norm if there is one. A lot of times they'll go to a quiet place, get some healing, and then they'll usually meet up with some family members. Some of them they recognize, some of them they don't because they're from other lives. They will typically go to either the Akashic Library and look at
Mm.
a life review, meeting with some guides, or go to a room and meet with a guide or two or three and just kind of share about that life they left, their impressions of it, discuss it with some others. And sometimes there's a little bit of an audience there who are other souls who want to learn from their experience.
Oh, interesting.
And then typically what they'll do is go plan their next life or even go before their spirit council and kind of discuss it a little bit and then go plan their next life. And they usually do that with a team of other spirit guides, other people who will be in that next life with them. And then up here, I get to ask lots of questions like, are you doing the majority of the planning? Are there others doing the majority of the planning? And sometimes it surprises me because sometimes they leave the planning 100% up to their spirit team and say, you know what? You know the lessons I need to learn in this next
Wow.
life.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what kind of flavor it comes in, what kind of package it comes in. I'm going to learn them anyway. Just go ahead and plan it. I just want to get
Wow.
back.
Wow. Oh, they just want to get back. See, isn't that crazy? Because I feel like from the earth perspective, we're like, yeah, this is hard. I don't know if I want to do this again. But then, yeah, our souls are like, oh, yeah, that was maybe better or worse than one of my other lives. But yeah, let's go do it again. Let's learn some more. Like it's just such a fascinating concept how different our soul feels about it than
Mhm.
we as humans do.
Yeah,
It's
100%. Because I ask that question a lot because I really do want the client to see that they look at things from a completely different perspective
Mhm.
once they are no longer in that human mindset, when they're
Yeah.
no longer feeling the pain and the suffering. And the soul, virtually, I can't say nothing's ever 100%, but I can't say 100% of the time, but pretty close to that,
Mhm.
is really excited to come back. Even if they're a little bit hesitant, they still want to come back because they say, I know it's the growth that I want for my soul. I know it's an experience I need to have. Yeah, these are going to be some tough lessons, but I really want this for my soul growth. And I'm super excited. And I had a client last week who almost like sat on the edge of, I don't know, I'll call it the universe, but it's not the universe, but sat on the edge looking down at Earth. And she just had such a longing to go back to Earth. And I said,
Wow.
what is the attraction with Earth? You just went through a pretty tough life. And she said, it's so beautiful. The blue and the green. I just look down and it's so mesmerizing. And it's like I'm so drawn to Earth and just being able to feel the emotions and all of the things that come with that. And she had also experienced a life where she was an alien, an ET, with no emotional responses whatsoever, more
Mm-hmm.
robotic than anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so she was really excited to go back and feel the emotion. She needed a break from them. She got a
Yeah.
break.
Yeah.
And now she was ready to jump back in. But yeah, I will tell you that most souls are super excited and really anxious to get back to Earth.
That is such a wild thought as a human. And that's so funny you say that because I remember my first past life that we did a couple years ago in that session was very similar. It was like an alien life where it was just like no real emotion, just kind of doing the thing. Like I go here, I do this work, I go over here, I do this work, I do this. Yeah. And I remember you asking questions like, are you feeling anything? Like anything? Like, is anything happening? And it was just like such a boring life. Yeah, and then at the end my higher self was like, this is the point, like you're so sensitive and emotional in this lifetime and you
Mhm.
really resent having all of those feelings and all the crying and all the processing and all the stuff that you do that's hard, but you didn't learn anything in that life. Like you didn't have all those emotions, so you really didn't learn much. It was simple, it was boring, maybe it was like a rest life, but you didn't come away with your soul having learned a bunch of lessons. Whereas this lifetime, all that work and the emotion and all of that you're learning and your soul's actually growing from it. And so I thought that was such a fascinating just idea that like at least it makes it maybe a little bit better. Like, okay, all the pain isn't for nothing. Like, I'm actually doing a lot of growth here even when I don't realize I'm doing the growth. So it's really interesting to hear you say that somebody else had a very similar experience because it's like, yeah, it's so, we hate that as humans, but from a soul perspective, it's like that's exactly why we come.
Yeah, and Earth is described as a school.
Mm.
And we come here to learn. And imagine Earth is like a summer class, a condensed, intense summer class because the lives are much shorter on Earth than they are on other planets. And because of the emotions, we learn so much quicker. That's what makes it so intense but impactful in our soul growth. So that's why so many souls choose to incarnate on Earth, even though they know it's going to feel hard. But once they get out of it, and once you get out of it, my clients describe to me like, yeah, it's almost like brushing dirt off your pants when you fall down. And you're just kind of brushing it off, and it's like, yeah,
It's
okay,
almost like
it
so
happened.
dismissive of our thing, like, oh yeah, just brush it off, rub some dirt on it.
Right, really. It's like, okay, you fell off your bike. Okay, that's fine. Brush it off and get back on again.
Hmm.
But they really like it for the soul growth. And another really interesting thing is sometimes souls will find themselves up in that in between space and they're just reconnecting with source.
Oh
And
wow.
so, super quick story. I had a woman reconnect with source and she described herself going into like this big giant ball, she said, and it was just oneness. And she went inside this, she could best describe it as a big ball. And she said she was like a set of eyes, a pair of eyes inside this big giant ball. But then there were all kinds of other eyes in this ball looking out from this ball.
Oh,
They
that's
were all one, yet they had their own perspective that they could see through their own set of eyes.
wow.
And it was very peaceful. And she's trying to, I mean, imagine trying to describe what it's like to be one with source again. I mean, it's not an easy feat.
Yeah, yeah.
But so she was describing this, and I'm like, wow. And she was saying how peaceful and wonderful and just how it just is. And I'm like, wow, are you going to just stay there forever? I mean, I knew she didn't because I was
No.
talking to her, right? But I'm like, are you going to stay there forever? And she's like, no, it actually gets really boring.
Interesting. I wouldn't have thought that, because you hear people talk about, oh, it's just blissful and it's beautiful but yeah, it's like, well, but if you're not learning and growing and evolving, it's like that's what we all want to do. It's like that's what source wants to do.
Exactly. And we are source, fractals or fragments of source who have come down here. We're part of that oneness. And it's like source fractals itself off and wants to have all these different experiences because I mean imagine just being isness all the time. I mean,
Isness.
nothing
Oh God.
happened. There is nothing.
Yeah.
It's just everything. So
Mhm.
so I said, wow, it's boring. Yeah, it gets boring after a while. And so I said, what are you going to do now? And she said, well, I want to go have another life. And Earth is the best place because you have all these emotions and all these ups and downs. And it's quite a ride.
So funny. I love hearing that perspective. When you're actually taking somebody through it and they're actually accessing a past life. So for maybe people who don't quite understand the mechanics or, maybe they're skeptical or, what do you think is like really happening in their mind and their energy and their body when they're accessing that information?
Well, I always tell my clients it's not your conscious human mind that can access it because to your ego mind or your conscious human mind, you don't normally have access to that information there. So you are getting it from your soul. Your higher self it's almost like feeding it the image to you. So that's why you have to be really open and receptive to it and why we do some mind clearing exercises before we go into it because that's where you're getting the images and it's really I think it's more like a memory. I don't know that we fully understand the mechanics of it yet, but people say it feels like a memory. And like I said, there's a lot of emotion that can come with it too. And the emotional actions are real. Their bodies respond
Mhm.
and the themes connect directly to something that's happening in their present life. So maybe we're accessing actual soul memory. Maybe we're accessing symbolic stories that the subconscious mind uses to communicate with, or maybe consciousness exists outside time in ways we don't understand yet. But
Mhm.
what matters clinically is that the insight leads to real healing.
Yeah. Well, and it's so interesting because there have been like case studies on this and I think that's a lot of what I did when I first was kind of going through this awakening and deconstructing my past religion and all of that was, like has anybody actually studied this? Like what does it say? And it's so fascinating how just like you were saying, so many people who don't know each other, or who have never done this before or probably don't even have a whole lot of knowledge around what's typical or not typical all say so many of the same things or have
Yeah.
very similar experiences. And that's what so many of those case studies show too is that all of these people have there's such common threads. And that goes for like NDEs and stuff as well. And that to me is just so like evidential. Like to me that says a lot that all of these people who have no connection, no idea, all are bringing forward these very very similar feelings and emotions and even to down to like the things that they're describing seeing and the way things work and I just think that's so fascinating.
100% agreed. I had two clients who probably were about, I don't know, maybe 4 to 6 months apart. They don't know each other. I don't even remember if they live on the same continent. For sure, they weren't in the same state. And I hadn't posted, the first client's session. So there's no way they could have had access to that client's session. So the second client comes along and describes a life nearly identical to the other client where they were a little tiny prehistoric bird that scurried around on the ground. And they described, and I was thinking, deja vu. So they were the
What a
exact,
random thing. Like that's not it's so specific.
yeah, very specific. And how they would run and scurry and live under rocks and moss and things like that, just trying not, their whole life was spent trying not to be eaten by a bigger dinosaur. And eventually they both got eaten by a bigger dinosaur.
Oh no.
But but it was really interesting because I had never had one before and then to have one that was maybe just a couple 2 or 3 months apart from each other, the exact same kind of bird, that was wild.
Yeah. Oh, that's even cooler because it's just so random and specific. Like there's no way I wouldn't have even it wouldn't even have occurred to me to do something like that or honestly even be like look at a past life as an animal, like that's just outside of my normal like thought process. So, oh, I just love stories like that. That's part of what, to me, even like having done it myself, I feel like if I hadn't, that's the kind of thing that makes me go, oh, wait, there's something to this. Like, this really makes sense.
So
Yeah.
after we look at the life in between lives, that's when we then connect to the higher self.
Okay.
So I'll lead you through another kind of little mini meditation mid session, and we'll connect to the higher self. We're going to meet your spirit team in a conference room in the spirit realm, and that's when we start asking all the questions that we put together in part 1 to that when we were doing the intake. I was also writing down a bunch of questions to have as an outline to ask your higher self. And that's when we start going down that list. A lot of times the higher self will deviate and take us in a direction we didn't anticipate. But I do really try to get through at least your main questions that you wanted to get through. And of course, anything that comes through, we just trust that that's what the higher self really wants you to know or heal or learn at that moment in time.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember my first session, I had like so many questions, like 10, 12, I don't know, too many questions. And so we did so much, and you were so gracious to, help me get through all of them. But what's fascinating is like doing all of that work a couple years ago that got me here. Like this time I was like, I have like 3 questions maybe. Like I feel like I had so much, I'd gained so much from the first session that I feel like it put me on this trajectory of like being more confident in where I was going and where my life was going. And that it was just so helpful to like see now, like to look back and be like, that session was really a catalyst that got me here. And now this session is like confirming kind of like the trajectory that I took that started back then. It's just really neat. When you have a client that maybe sees something that feels traumatic, like you were saying, like they're crying, or they witness in a past life something that maybe somebody died, or maybe it reminds them of something traumatic that happened in this life, how do you kind of handle that, when you start to realize like, oh, something is upsetting them, or it's a little dark or something?
Yeah, so first, I take a breath. And since I'm always connected to my higher self throughout the session, I say, okay, higher self, here we go. And then I just listen to the guidance of my higher self. So it's in the same way you described. You don't know what's going to be coming out of your mouth next. The words just appear and they just arrive and you speak them. It really literally is the same thing for me. So when I'm just as connected to my higher self as the client is to theirs when I do these. In fact, before we begin, I say a prayer and I do a visualization where I have both of our spirit teams of light meet in a spiritual room all together, talking as if it's like a round robin set of chairs. And we're all working together as a team. And I have to share this with you. So early on, when I was doing practice sessions to learn this back in 2017, 2018, I was doing a practice session on the woman who actually introduced me to doing this kind of work. I said,
Oh,
hey,
fun.
now that I've got some practice sessions under my belt, can I do one on you? Because I'd really love to get great feedback from you. So I remember doing this session, and that's when I used to do them in person. Now I do them online. So I do them all over the world now. But I remember asking a particular question, and it literally just, these questions were just flowing into my mind. They weren't on my paper. I didn't have them pre-planned. They were just flowing into my mind, and I would just ask them as they kind of came into my mind. And I asked a particular question, and then the answer that came from her, channeled through her, was like, I'm glad you asked that question we gave you. And I said, wait a minute, what do you mean that question you gave me? And then she said, well, we're the one giving you the questions to ask her. Did you think you were coming up with these questions on your own?
Wow. Oh, wow. That's
And I said,
wild.
really? Well, so you're the one feeding me the questions? They're like, yeah, we're right here above you. So I remember looking up in the room. I looked up and I just kind of quietly waved.
Hi. Oh, wow. Yeah, because I would have thought, oh, it's your higher, which, it probably is sometimes, but the fact that it's, maybe her or whoever it is, their higher selves coming through, which makes sense, right? It's like, well, this is what they need to know. So these are the questions you should ask. But yeah, I'm sure hearing it come through like that was probably alarming.
It took me by surprise, but I've never forgotten it because I'm like, that explains what's really happening. I mean, it
Yeah.
really truly is happening. So like I said, I don't know what's going to come out of my mouth. I really am just in very much of a flow state. So, what I would do with each client, and depending on what my higher self and their team tell me I should do, but generically, I slow way down. I really discern whether it's their team talking or if it's really, if it gets kind of, let's just say, dark, which thankfully doesn't happen very often. I ask a lot of what I'll call test questions to discern if it's really just kind of a mischievous spirit that got here somehow. But again, thank goodness that doesn't happen often. But on the occasion that it does, but I do so much prep work and protecting with prayer and white light and intention that it really is so rare that something like that happens. So I don't want anyone listening to focus on that or let that fear stick in their minds, but I do know how to handle it. And again, not to put this in anyone's mind, but I've had a couple of sessions where, let's just say, some very mischievous, dark entities tried to come through and speak through that person. So I figure out what's going on. I don't entertain them. We do some clearing exercises. I know how to do clearing exercises to get them removed, to get them out of the room. If by some chance, and this would be like a 0.001% that it's ever happened, we can't, I don't take it any further because I'm not here to have the person channel a dark entity or a dark energy or something like that. I'll do the clearing. If for some reason it's not working, and there's multiple reasons that that could be, they're not finished with that part of their soul journey for various reasons, then I don't entertain it and I end the session there. So I really ground their nervous system. I slow down the scene. I help the client observe rather than relive. So I might have them kind of pull out of the scene. If it's too upsetting for them, I'll have them be more like an observer then instead of having to be in it and feel it as much because I don't want to re-traumatize them. And then bringing in the higher self for healing or clearing if needed. So it's not re-traumatizing. It's really just kind of managing it as it comes up.
Yeah, and that's so interesting. And I'm glad you said that because, like you said, you've done thousands of sessions, and it almost never happens. Because I hear that a lot too, is people being really afraid of even like tuning into their intuition or developing their psychic senses because they're like, well, what if I connect with something bad? And I'm like, that is not as common as we've probably been made to believe through like the internet and horror movies and all these things that make us think, oh, that's so easy to happen and it's so common. And it's just really not.
It's not.
Have you
It's not.
ever like had that happen and then still connected with the higher self after?
Yes. So
And did they say anything about why that may have happened?
well, so I did have it happen. The one that's popping in my mind the most right now happened maybe 4 summers ago. And okay, so it's not that you're accessing something in the session that you weren't already accessing. So what I mean by that is it didn't come to you. You didn't connect to this thing as a result of the session. It was already there.
Okay. And
You
that makes a lot more sense. Yeah.
Yeah, in other words, you brought it with you.
Yeah.
Like it didn't happen as a result of the session. We just tapped into it because you were in that really relaxed state. And
Interesting.
yeah, and so this client in particular had a ton of health issues. I mean, just random and they came on pretty suddenly, but they were like a lot of health issues and they were becoming really disrupting to her life. And they like none of them really were connected. They didn't make sense the way they came on. And so when we tried to access her higher self, I was able to figure out because it will often, if it's a dark entity, it will often try to trick me and make me think that I'm talking to the higher self. But I can tell when I'm not connected to someone's higher self, when it's something else. Like I just know and I can tell because of the answers that are being given. And then I know how to ask a lot of, I'll call them test questions, to ask questions. And I know what a higher self answer would be to those types of questions. And I'm not getting those types of answers. So I know I'm not connected to a higher self. So I started asking these test questions and I said, you're not fooling me. I can tell we're not connected to her higher self. So I'm commanding you right now to reveal who you are and why you're here and what you're doing. And it turns out that it was a reptilian attachment. Yeah. So And the crazy thing is, I was on vacation while I did this session. And before I went on vacation, I intuitively I said, I feel like I need to bring some books with me. Higher self, what books do you want me to bring and read? And there was this one book on my nightstand that I had barely started and hadn't touched for many months. And that one really jumped out at me. So I grabbed it, put it in my suitcase, and I actually started reading it when I was there. Then the night before her session, I was on a walk and I was meditating while I was on this walk, and I said to my higher self, I'm like, hey, what do you want me to know? What can I know right now? And I heard my higher self say, I want you to just connect to the Arcturians, which is an ET race. I want you to connect to the Arcturians and just say hi and feel what it's like to connect with the Arcturians. I said, okay. Hi, Arcturians. Like, and they said, we just want you to know we're here. We're here for anything that you might need. We're really at the service of the human race to help with whatever you might need. And I thought it really strange because that book I was reading was about this man who, Wayne Brewer, I think is his name, who works with the Arcturians to remove reptilians. Okay, I have no idea what's happening the next day in this session. I have no idea. Okay.
Wow.
So I'm reading this book and kind of going through his method, and I pretty much finished it, and I have this session the next day, and then this happens. And I'm like, whoa, okay, breadcrumb trail led right to this client, preparing me for this client. So I called in the Arcturians and I had them help me remove the reptilian that she brought into the session that was already attached, that had been causing all these health issues.
Wow.
Got it removed using the Arcturians. It was removed. I was definitely connected to her higher self after the fact. But unfortunately, she was so freaked out by everything that had just happened. She wanted to end the session, but we did it where she was grounded, where she was, reconnected. I did hear from her a couple weeks later, and she said, you just have no idea how much my health has improved in just 2 weeks.
Wow.
Like, you cannot imagine.
Wow. Isn't that such a cool confirmation? Because I'm sure you do a lot of that emotional stuff all the time, but it's almost like just more when it's more obvious to the physical,
Yeah.
other people can see it too, because they can't always see how it helped heal you emotionally.
Right.
But when you can say, no, this healed my physical symptoms too, that's just so validating, I'm sure.
100%.
Did her higher self say how she got that attachment in the first place?
No, because she wouldn't let me go there. She was so freaked out by everything that had happened. Okay, but I will tell you this. So I have another client that I've done multiple sessions with, and I brought it to her, and her higher self is, without going into too much detail, there are some higher selves that give me answers that are steeped in massive wisdom, and they're just connected at a higher level. So her higher self always referred to it as the higher self times 3, meaning it's the higher self of the higher self of the higher self. It always called itself the higher self times 3. So I would go to her, and we would do sessions together all the time to help her and to help me do some research. So I brought this particular client's session to her, and I asked her higher self times 3 about that session. And you cannot make this stuff up. It was something to do with a vow many eons ago that her soul made to a dinosaur-like being who saved it and raised it as its own. And she made a vow to that being as part of the exchange of you saved me energy, made a vow to be at the service of this dinosaur-like being.
Wow. And so
Crazy
the same being, not necessarily the lineage of the same being, the same one that
Yes,
had
same
originally.
being.
That is so wild. And it's
So
so
wild.
interesting too, because we've talked about this, and I know I'll share more in my Patreon, and we can hit on it, but I saw reptilians in my just a couple days ago session that I did with you, and it's so interesting, even how you just described it, of dinosaur being, not necessarily the humanoid reptilian type that just stuck out to me because I'm like, that's what I saw, you know, because you have an idea of what you've heard or what you've seen just, you know, from just general theories or stories or whatever. And then it's like what I saw in the actual past life was a little bit different. Like it was more of a dinosaur type reptilian. And
Yeah.
so it's just interesting how like those little details, like, you know, that you kind of pick up on. And I wouldn't have even thought to go to the higher self times three, like to bring another session in to go, you know, it's like it's like mind boggling the kind of overlap that is, but that's so cool and fascinating. It's just like, I feel like you're probably learning so much. So it's cool to have you learn all that and then bring it to us. And cause I feel like you're blowing my mind right now with stuff that I wouldn't like real. You know, I'm open-minded. And even that is like, wow, I wouldn't have even thought of that being a thing, you know?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. And that client, the higher self times three client, was she came out of her session and she's like, I never could have made that up. Like it was like she was just like, whoa, that was crazy. Like I never could have made that up. And it had to do with something like my client made a vow to protect the dinosaur being's offspring as a result of her being saved. But it was like the higher self times three client said it was like this dinosaur egg, but it never hatched. And so she was perpetually, eternally tied to watching over this egg that never hatched.
oh, that's so
And it
interesting.
kept her tied to that dinosaur reptilian being somehow.
That almost makes me think like, you know, was it maybe a purposeful kind of situation on the end of like the other being where it's like, oh yeah, I'll make a deal with you.
Yeah,
You be in charge of my offspring until like, you know, whenever. But then the offspring never actually comes, so it's just like an eternal loop of that's yeah.
exactly. Exactly.
Wow, which
And then
sounds very reptilian in itself.
very much so. And we were told from the higher self times three client that this is not the first life where that she's been impacted by this other entity as a result of that vow. But
Wow.
this was the life where it was meant to end and get
Wow.
resolved. And it did in the session.
Wow. Oh, that is, it's so neat. I'm happy
Great.
for her.
Right.
Because I cannot imagine how awful that would be. Yeah. Just trying to, you know, it just, yeah, having all of those health issues. And, you know, because it's like if she hadn't have come to you, yeah, how would you ever figure that out? Like that, it's such a, you know, even like I said, if you're somebody that connects with your higher self and you already connect with there's something different about having somebody else assist you, like get into that place and ask the right questions. And, you know, because yeah, that's so much of it is asking the right questions and knowing where to go and knowing the difference between what the higher self sounds like and what it doesn't sound like. And, you know, like we might not always know that. So, oh, I just love that story. That's so fun.
Well,
Okay.
yeah, and not only that, but if you think about it, had she gone to, and I'm not knocking normal human therapists, but
Right. Sure.
a human therapist is not going to look into a reptilian attachment. I mean, not to my information. I don't think they're
Right.
going to do that. So when someone feels drawn to do a session like this with a particular practitioner, whether it's me or someone else, and you just feel that nudge, it's really important to listen to that inner voice and actually do it, because that's your soul leading you to something that is going to help you or help you move forward or help you in some other way. Because I have people who schedule consultation calls with me or will schedule a session and then they cancel for whatever reason. And I'm thinking, oh, I mean, I can't make anyone do anything they don't want to do, but it's just like, oh, you felt the nudge. You tried to answer the call, but then you stopped yourself from answering the call. And you don't get called to do something like this without that nudge, without there being a reason that you're being called to do it. And it's just, I don't want to say too bad because everything's just an experience, right? But from a human perspective, you're like, it's too bad that you didn't follow through with it, because that was your higher self nudging you to do something, like,
Yeah.
again, whether it's with me or someone else. So it
Yeah.
really is really important to just follow those nudges and that inner voice and not second guess them or go, well, I don't really have the money now. Reach out to the person and say, hey, is there any way I can make payments? Or I
Mhm.
really feel called to do something like this.
Yeah.
How can we make this happen?
Right. Because then, because again, if your higher self, is guiding you to that, there'll be a way to make it work. Like there'll be a way for it to happen. Yeah, and that's
Exactly.
something I'm constantly saying that to my audience and to my clients, that because so many people misunderstand how subtle it is. Like they think, oh, I'm going to have this dream and it's going to be so, which could happen. But, a lot of times those messages are just like you said, it's just a nudge. Like it's just very subtle. And, then, but you like use your own logic and your 3D brain to just like talk ourselves out of it. Like, oh, I don't know. I don't know if I should spend the money, or I don't know if I don't know. I was feeling it, but now like maybe I'm too busy. It's like, oh, but if you get that nudge, don't let yourself logically get out of it, because there's a reason that you felt that. And I tell
Mhm.
people that all the time, because yeah, we're constantly talking ourselves out of stuff that we actually need and that we like received instruction for when we were actually open to it and listening to our intuition and our higher self and all that.
Yeah, and then we wonder why we keep getting stuck in the same loop and why
Yeah.
nothing's changing.
Yeah. Because we're not listening to that.
Right.
Yes. What do you feel like is the most common thing that you hear from the higher self that, kind of threads everybody together? Like a lot of people's higher self will say this same thing to people that they're not usually getting in their day to day.
Yeah, so I usually find a few different themes. I mean, there's a number of them, but some of the more common ones is higher selves always tell my clients to meditate. So it's the door to hearing from their soul and receiving that higher wisdom. It helps
Mm-hmm.
reset the nervous system, which gets frayed when we're super involved with earth life. And the meditation helps us to reconnect, to get in touch with that voice, with that intuition, and it helps us learn to hear it more so that when we're out in our daily life, we can hear it better. So that's number one. Number two, the higher selves always tell my clients to remember who they really are, that they're not a human living in a difficult world, subject to endless suffering. We're souls having an experience. Now, we've chosen Earth this time around because Earth is a planet of contrast. You have good and bad, and that's what helps us learn. We learn what we want by experiencing things that we discover, oh, I don't want that. And it pushes us to move toward the things we do want. I don't want to have toxic relationships. Let me find healthy people to have relationships with because I've had enough of toxic relationships, right? So we learn from experiencing opposites. And that really is the message, though. This is just an experience. It will be over in the blink of an eye. We'll see everything from a totally different, higher perspectives. And our souls will be so grateful for the experience, no matter how painful it seemed to be at the time. So if we can remember who we really are, that we are a fractal, like I said earlier, of Creator God, sent here to have endless experiences, it's easier not to take this life quite so seriously.
Yeah, I really do feel like that is such a helpful idea too. And I've thought about that a lot, like since meeting with you, and just, over the years, you hear that from, people who do have these types of experiences, or people who even have like NDEs, and come back and they're like, it's really just not that big of a deal when you're on the other side. Like your soul's like, yeah, it's like a play, you go in, you play your part, and then you come back and you're not in the play anymore. That was just a part that you played. And that's such an interesting idea when we're so in it right now. Like we're so just like wrapped up in all the emotions and the things. And, you know, this idea for like for us, it's life or death, which it is life or death. But, there's so many lives and so many deaths that it's just not like it doesn't getting that higher perspective, I feel like really helps you not get so bogged down with like the hard parts of life.
Exactly, exactly. And a third thing I want to tell you is I repeatedly hear that we need to learn how to truly love ourselves. So I remember early on when I was still pretty new doing this type of hypnosis, I had a woman come to me and she had all sorts of health issues. When I started to dive into them and ask her higher self if she could be healed, her higher self said that she could. She could be healed from all of these physical things if she could learn how to truly love herself. All of her health issues would disappear. I said, all of them? Her higher self said, all of them. So see,
Yeah.
self-love is balance and ease. Cancer, Hashimoto's, whatever health issue, it's dis-ease. So there's something out of alignment between our human perception and who we really are. So the key, our higher self says, again, is to remember who we really are and to learn how to truly, totally love ourselves, bringing our whole selves back into balance.
Yes. I love that. And I remember reading in a book at some point that cancer in particularly was partially linked to like holding in emotions and like not
Mhm.
expressing them and not processing them. And of course, not a medical doctor, and I don't want it to come across like it's ever anyone's like fault that they have that
Right.
there needs to be guilt or shame around having a disease. But I was just thinking about that because I was thinking of someone that I knew that had struggled with cancer multiple times throughout their life and different cancers. And I thought about this person and how I was like, yes, I know that about them. Like specifically, it's somebody that I love and they're very like tight with their emotions. And it's more of that like, no, I'm okay. I'm fine. I'm fine. Everything is fine. Knowing that everything is probably not fine, but they just don't feel comfortable or maybe
Mhm.
never learned the skills or how that would help them to express those emotions and to process them. And, I don't know their like soul contract or their story or whatever else could play into that. But I think about that all the time about how, and I've seen other things like that too, where there's just an obvious pairing of, a certain health issue that they're struggling with and a certain emotional pattern that seems to tie directly to that. So, yeah, I think it's so interesting. And what an idea that you could be healed from all of your issues potentially. Like that's life changing. It's, especially for anybody listening that might have significant health issues, like to think that you could heal it emotionally when maybe doctors or the medical system, again, not a doctor,
Right.
but when you're not finding answers elsewhere,
Right. Right.
like what do you have to lose,
Yeah.
trying to tackle it from an emotional standpoint.
Yeah, really. What do you have to lose except not having to drag this onto another life that you
Right.
are holding these trapped emotions? So, I want to give you a couple of super quick examples. So, I had one client come to me who did a session and she had cancer and she specifically said to me, "I know I have cancer because I'm holding anger."
The
She said,
higher
"I
self
know."
or she did?
She did. She
Wow.
said, "I know because someone had sexually assaulted her
Ah.
when I think it was in a workplace. I can't remember the details of it. It was a number of years ago. But her husband never stuck up for her. And she became very angry and resentful that she had to basically defend herself and go through this event herself. And her husband wasn't there for her. And she said, "I have been holding anger towards him ever since. And I know that's what caused it." And her higher self
Wow.
confirmed it in the session. But to show the opposite of that, I had a client, this was again years ago, who came to me, a young woman who one of the questions she wanted to ask at the end of her session had to do with doing a body scan to ask her higher self, is there anything going on in her body that we may not currently be aware of you could bring to her attention? And then another related a question. But this was after we pulled a number of trapped emotions in her body. So like I'll ask questions like, is she holding any trapped anger? If so, where is it? Why is she holding it? And we'll in the session, I mean, I pull out all the stops to work through it in the session to get it pulled and sent to creator's light and replaced with something higher. So anger, resentment, betrayal, feeling unseen, unheard, unloved, any of those, abandonment, any of those kind of emotions, I work with those in a session. So we did a bunch of healing like that, pulled a bunch of trapped emotions. And then one of the last questions after doing the body scan was, well, does she have any genetic markers in her body that could be triggered and form into any kind of disease if it's not resolved? And her
Interesting.
higher self said, yes, she has a genetic marker for breast cancer. And I said,
Wow.
okay. So it was in her genes.
Hmm.
It was there. And I said, well, is it going to be activated? What can we do so that genetic marker does not get activated? And her higher self said, actually, all of the healing you did earlier, that resolved it. But the genetic marker is still there. And I said, well,
Wow.
what can we do with it? Can we remove the genetic marker? Is it going to activate someday? Do we need to do more healing? Like, tell us more. And the higher self was like, no, she doesn't need it anymore because you resolved what would have needed to be resolved physically,
Ah,
the anger that she was holding toward mom, that it would have needed to be resolved that way, but now you've already resolved it in the session, so it's no longer needed. So I'm just going to remove that genetic marker. So her higher self
right.
removed the genetic marker, and I verified. I said, so let me just verify. Is there a chance in the future that she could get breast cancer? Now, again, I'm not a doctor either. I'm just going by what
Mhm.
I'm hearing coming out of
Right.
her mouth when she's channeling her higher self. And the answer that came out of her was no, there's no chance. We removed the marker and there's no chance she'll get it. She resolved the underlying issue that would have made that quote unquote necessary for her in order to resolve that pent up, unresolved anger.
Oh,
Isn't that wild?
oh, that's so cool. That is, I love hearing stories like that because, yeah, it just makes everything is so connected, and so it makes you think like, wouldn't it be easier? Isn't it so worth it to try to tackle all of those emotional things or blocks or wounds that are happening, because yeah, they could manifest into something else. And just the idea that your body has to express it one way or another. So if you
Right.
don't process it emotionally and energetically, it's going to have to express physically because it just can't sit there forever, which is just a whole podcast episode in itself, like what a fascinating topic. Oh, I love that. I love that that comes through in your work.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. One other thing to go to your question. Lastly, higher self always tells my clients to do things that are creative and that bring them joy, and to
Mm,
remember to have fun, to enjoy the ride. It is a ride. Try to have fun, do as much as you can to have fun because creativity connects us to our souls. So whether that's painting, dancing, writing a book, doing crafts, whatever it is, it keeps you in the present moment, number one, right? Out of looping in the past or worrying about the future. And that's exactly where your higher self wants you to be, is in the present.
mhm.
That is where we're supposed to be living, right? So find things that bring you joy and just do them and make it a priority.
Yes. Oh, and that's so interesting because just in my higher self session the other day, when we were asking about my career and my higher self was like, just have fun with it,
Right.
just do the thing that's fun, like you enjoy this process, focus on that part. Like it's like, the more you follow that high frequency feeling, like that will just automatically overflow. I had a similar experience too where I one of my membership clients, a woman who I did a psychic read for, and she really enjoys painting, but she works like a corporate job and she wasn't sure, like, should I or shouldn't I kind of do more of this painting or pursue this. And something that was really cool that's very in line with that her guide said to me when I was tuning into it was like, they gave me this image of like a flower, but a lot of flower symbolism. That's funny, came up in my
Right.
session too. But it was like a flower that was just like blooming open, and they were kind of telling me like the painting, it's like she had all this inner creativity that wasn't getting expressed, and that painting was like allowing it to like come out and express. And in doing that, it was like opening up all these other things for her and just like allowing that energy to kind of like grow and just, I guess, like bring forth that other like good energy. And I thought that was so interesting, and so she has started painting and like getting more into it and doing paintings for other people. And I just, yeah, it makes me think about exactly what you said, like that creativity is in so many of us and we're probably just not expressing it, or we don't recognize how much the enjoyment of something simple like a painting has such a big impact on our lives and our energy.
Right, because it's not helping pay the bills. It's
Right.
not helping us pay the rent. It's not helping us buy groceries or put gas in our cars. And so that's when we're so stuck in the human part of it and the just daily survival and living, and we've got to be productive, that we forget that we're a soul.
Yeah.
And we need to be here to do things that also feed our soul, like meditation, learning to love yourself, being in joy and doing creative things. I mean, it comes up all the time about doing things that bring you joy and a sister to that, doing things that are creative. Even if you're a terrible dancer, the higher self will be like, go dance in the living room like nobody's watching. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just the entire spirit realm watching, but forget about that. Just dance, you know?
Don't worry about them.
They're probably dancing with you anyway.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And it's like, isn't that part of being human, right? Is this because, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but like a lot of these other alien species, like, they don't really express creativity the way humans do. Like, that's a very human thing to like create music or art or dance and, all these things that we love that I don't know why they don't really do it in these other species. So it's like, you only do that, or at least for the most part, as a human, like, don't ignore it. Like, you have this amazing capability to be
Yeah.
creative.
And you will remember those times when you get on the other side. You will
Mm,
remember, you know what? Even though life was really challenging, really hard, I mean, I faced so much heartache, heartbreak, whatever it is, I learned how to find moments of joy in that. And I learned how to make myself happy.
mm,
And you
yeah.
will remember that on the other side, and you will be glad you did that. You'll be
Yeah.
so proud of you, like patting yourself on the back on the other side that you did that, and your team will too.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that idea. Speaking of, is there anything that your team or your higher self has ever said to you that you didn't want to hear? Maybe because I think that's something that a lot of people too think about. They're like, well, what if they tell me something that I don't, I don't like?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I remember this was years ago. I was early in my healing journey, and I would spend hours a week meditating. I built an actual meditation closet. It was the coolest thing ever.
Oh, wow.
But I also started doing 2-hour meditative baths each week, and it was wild. The water never got cold, so it was pretty wild. But in one bath, I was crying and feeling sorry for myself, asking my higher self, where's my knight in shining armor that's supposed to come down and swoop me up and carry me off into the sunset and help me solve all of my problems? And I will never forget, I heard this thunderous, loud, booming voice in my head that said, no one is coming to save you. You are your own savior.
Whew, tough
And
love.
it just stopped me cold. I was shocked at how loud and factual it was, but also I knew it was the truth and I didn't want to know that. I didn't want to hear that.
Oh,
So I guess it had to be that loud for me to remember it and to stop whining like I was a victim.
I feel like that is common too. Like I felt that a lot in my own life, or talking to my own guides about, like asking something and being like, that's up to you. Like, what do you, you handle that? Like don't play the victim and act like there's, like a miracle waiting to happen. Like that's your choice, and yeah, it's a lot of times I think we can get caught up in the spiritual world so much that we're like, well, I'm waiting for a miracle or I'm waiting for this manifestation to just drop into my lap and I don't actually have to do any work. And it's like, well, that's not the goal either. Like, sure, there's big things that might be waiting for you, but you have to actually take steps and your higher self and your team are waiting for you to actually, like, whether it's doing healing or taking certain steps or, or just realizing like truth that we don't want to hear, that like we
Right.
don't necessarily just get to, you know, sit and wait for everything to come or sit and wait to be saved. I've had very similar come to moments myself. So, yeah, I think that's really
Yeah.
interesting.
Because if it's part of our lesson, we're not going to skip it. Like you're
Yeah,
not going to
yeah,
skip fourth grade and just jump to fifth grade. You have to go through
yeah,
fourth grade and
right.
then you get to go to fifth grade. So if it's
Yeah,
part of your fourth grade lesson, you're going to fourth grade and you're going to learn it one way or another and you're going to repeat fourth grade until you learn it. And if you don't learn it in this life, you have the next one. And I see that all the time.
mm,
What you don't learn here, you'll carry forward. So I tell my clients, I'm like, well, you can either learn that lesson now or, it's not a big deal. You can just carry it to the next one. And they're always like, no, I don't want to carry it to. Okay, so let's get down to the business of figuring out from your higher self, what are the lessons you came here to master in this lifetime? And how are you doing on them?
mm,
What do you have left to learn? And how can you best learn it? Like higher self, give her the steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How does she learn these lessons so she can master them and not have to carry them to another life.
Yes. Oh, that's such a good way to put it too, especially when you think about it like in terms of like fourth grade. It's like, do we always want to do the work? No. But is it better than repeating fourth grade? Like nobody wants to do that. So
Right.
you might as well like just go ahead and buckle in. And another thing that I remember my guides telling me is like, you don't, it doesn't always have to be the hard way. Like there's ways to learn lessons
Hmm.
that could be more pleasant or not. Like that actually reminds me of my first past life session with you or we were just talking to the higher self, I guess, about whether or not I should leave my marriage and how that came through, saying, does her soul like actually, if her soul could have its way, like which road would she take? And it came through and said, like, leave, we can move much faster without him.
Right.
And that just goes to show it's like you could learn the lesson either way. You could learn the
Right.
lesson the hard way, or you could learn it the easy way. And like, yeah, this might be a hard decision at first, but like ultimately, and now for sure, I realize this was the much easier way to take. And I can still learn the same lessons, but they don't have to be so painful as if I had stayed.
Right. And that's the key.
Mm-hmm.
Learning to listen to your higher self and get that higher self perspective and that wisdom, because we get stuck in oh, it's going to be messy. How am I going to make it financially? How are the kids going to do? Forgetting that our kids have their own soul team that will be there for them, right? We're not the one that can do everything for everyone, right?
Right.
We focus on ourselves, and of course, not forgetting our children, but getting that higher perspective, because we can tend to be really narrow minded and focused narrowly on just looking at one set of issues instead of seeing the bigger picture.
Yeah. We're too focused on like the worst case scenario and like the worst case practical implications
Yes.
and yeah, not the possibility. It's more like, well, what if it went really well? you know,
Right. Right.
Instead
We
of
often choose the comfortable, uncomfortable because
Mhm.
it's familiar.
Yeah, yeah. Like the safe choice to make might not always actually be the safe choice. It's just the
Right.
maybe more familiar
More
choice.
familiar. We choose a
Yeah.
pain that's more familiar. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Are there any like common life patterns that kind of stick out to you that people have experienced that have past life roots, like, things that are affecting them in their day-to-day lives now that you see commonly from a past life?
Yeah, there's a couple that I see rooted in past lives that come up repeatedly.
Okay.
And I primarily see rejection and abandonment
Mm,
rooted in past lives. So someone dies in a past life and we feel alone and it wasn't resolved in that life. So the soul, even though it gets healing in between lives, it does leave some lingering issues for us to resolve once we're back in a body again. I mean, we've got to have something to do, right? So in this case,
we're
we come
bored.
back, right? Don't want you to be bored in the next life. So in this case, we'll come back as a different person, different circumstances, different personality, but face the same general issue again. So that it re-triggers that old abandonment wound or that old rejection wound. So maybe in this life, someone leaves you or dies and you feel abandoned again. So you think the pain is from this life, but from my experience, rejection and abandonment are often trapped emotions that started way before this current life. But they can be healed or resolved in this life, which then heals that core wound. Right? But if you don't resolve it and heal it in this life, you're going to drag it around like an old suitcase from trip to
Mm,
trip to trip, never unpacking your suitcase, and you're just going to drag it to the next life. So you can even trace it further than a past life. So quite a few clients have talked about the feeling of abandonment or separation they felt, let's say from when Creator God sent them out, so to speak, to experience lives. So they feel like they were pushed out or abandoned. And the key, however, is to remember and know with not just your mind, but with your heart, that you are still and always will be connected to Source.
mm,
And you cannot ever not be connected to one or be one with Source energy. So just like how if you take a dropper of water from the ocean and squeeze out one drop, that one drop is still the ocean. It
mm.
cannot not be ocean water. It's always going to be ocean water, even though it's no longer physically in that larger body of water. It's still a drop of ocean water.
Yeah, yeah, it never changes just because it's in a different location. And
Right.
that's so interesting too, because you think about, or at least I think about when, if we're not in our human body and we're in the soul body, then there's, everything's just perfect. So it's interesting to hear, like, no, as soon as they kind of like detach from source, they can still have this emotion of feeling disconnected or feeling something, which is
Mm-hmm.
really interesting to me. And that, because ultimately, right, that's the soul's goal. They're just doing it, in a different setting. Like, oh, they're still learning something from the very get go, just departing from source. Automatically, they're starting this learning curve of,
Mm-hmm.
having a feeling or a thought that then they have to, process or work through or, whatever it is. I just think there's so much to explore in that world. I just like constantly, this is how I
Right.
go down rabbit holes. It's just so interesting. It's like that's a whole new concept I had never even heard of or thought about before, and you could go a million different ways with that.
Yeah, for sure. That origin wound of abandonment. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, the last question I have for you is what is the craziest thing that you have witnessed someone say in a session, that has come through?
Okay, so this was early on when I used to do only in-person sessions again. And it was someone who I was just dragging in to do a session on, who I had no idea if he'd ever meditated or if even was even spiritually awake. And he said, "Sure, go ahead and practice on me." So here I am, wet behind the ears, and I have him laying on my massage table because they used to lay on a massage table to do it in person. And we're going along asking these questions and, trapped emotions and things like that. And then I asked, back then it was always typical in a question to ask, "Hey, can you do a body scan on him and see if he's got any health issues going on in his body that he's not currently aware of? And let's see what we can do with regard to that health issue." So it's quiet for a little while, and then all of a sudden I hear him say, his heart. He needs to go to a doctor and have his heart looked at. So here I'm referencing my training, right? And I said, "Well, but Dolores Cannon says that you can just heal it. So why can't you just heal it? Why does he have to go to, he can go to a doctor, but why, if there's something going on with his heart, can you just heal it?"
Yeah.
And I hear, "Okay, sure." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, okay. Well, tell me what it looks like as you do it." So it's quiet for a little bit, and then I hear something like, I mean, it was so many years ago, I'm trying to remember, but it was something like, "Okay, I'm shining a laser, intensifying the heat, shining the laser, doing some repair," whatever the higher self is saying to describe what it looks like as it's happening. So I'm like, "Okay, so it's all done, right?" "Yep, it's all done, all repaired, good to go." I'm like, "Okay, great. Thank you so much for that," right? So, and that was toward the end. So, I do my little wrap up and pull him out of hypnosis. As soon as he comes out of hypnosis, he shoots up on the massage table and he's clutching his chest and he goes, "What the heck was that?" And I said, "What do you mean?" Like, I didn't know. I thought the whole thing was pretty incredible, the whole session.
Right.
I didn't know what he was referring to. And he's like, he looks down at his heart and he goes, "My heart, my heart." And I'm like, "Yeah, you should probably go to a doctor," right? Go to a doctor and get it checked out. He's like, "You don't understand, Tracy." He goes, "I felt the laser. I felt the heat in my chest and I saw what they were doing. They repaired it. Like, I saw the whole thing. What the heck was that?" And I'm like, "Dude, I don't know. I'm just the one asking the questions." So I just remember, like, I'll never forget that because he was just so shocked and surprised. And
Yeah.
of course, I encouraged him to go to the doctor and
Right.
get it checked out. And he said, "Tracy, you don't understand. It's like, I know for a fact what I saw and I know what I felt and it's healed." And I'm like, "Well, I'm just telling you, maybe go get it
Yeah.
checked out."
Just
But
like in
he's
case.
like, he goes, "I'm healed." And I'm like, "Wow, that was pretty incredible."
That is amazing. Yeah, because again, that's probably not something a lot of people know is that like there's such a connection there. Like you can feel, when something takes place. And I know you know this, but I mention this sometimes in my podcast episodes, but you could probably verify it looks psycho. When I meditate, I'm like jumping around and, like I look like I'm having an exorcism. And it's that idea of like, when the energy is moving throughout your body, like you can feel it and it creates a reaction, in your physical body. Like even if you don't know consciously, like what's happening, So I feel that all the time, but it's so interesting. My favorite stories though are with someone who just gets like mind boggled by it, didn't know it was coming, wouldn't have anticipated it, and then all of a sudden is getting a very physical reaction from something that was, just happening in a meditation. And it's even more interesting that he didn't react immediately that way during. It wasn't until he kind of got out of the meditation where it was like, whoa, like, wait, what's happening? So,
yeah,
that's a cool story.
Super interesting. So after a session, I give my client an email that tells them, hey, look, because every session includes some sort of psychic surgery, whether it's something like that or pulling out trapped emotions, installing new beliefs. Maybe we download creator's definition of worthiness into you and have your definition of worthiness match creator's definition of worthiness. And maybe your higher self teaches you what it feels like to be worthy, that you know that it's possible to be worthy. Just whether it's downloads or pulling things out, you're having some sort of psychic surgery, some sessions more than others. I have a specific psychic surgery only session where we literally go through every body part and do emotions, physical body,
That's
everything to really do a lot of psychic surgery. But I send an email afterwards telling you about taking care of yourself post session, because even though in your physical body you're not feeling it, you did have surgery. And that client, the higher self times three, her higher self times three, specifically told me one day, they said, we want you to make sure that you are telling your clients that this is surgery. Just because they don't feel it in their physical body, it is surgery, and they need to take care of themselves just as if they just had an outpatient surgery, and get extra water, extra rest, and relaxation for several days following the session. Now, that doesn't mean you can't go to work the next day or anything like that. It doesn't mean that. It just means be really cognizant. Maybe take it a little bit slower, take some extra baths, go to bed extra early, just relax more. Don't plan any like family reunions the next day or something like that where you've got to be on for 12 hours.
Yeah.
So just taking that extra time, because you really are having a surgery, even though you can't feel it physically.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like almost like a detox, because I remember, again, a couple years ago, you did a ton of like psychic surgery stuff on me, of like all just sorts of, whatever old stuff that was in there. And not only do you feel, immediately different like after the session, but for me, I remember a few days after that just feeling ill. Like so ill. And it reminded me of like whenever in the past maybe I've cut out sugar for a month or two and you feel like you have the flu for a few days.
Yeah.
It was like that. And I just thought, oh wow, like that makes perfect sense to me. It's like, yeah, if you kind of just opened up and released all of this stuff, like it probably has to work itself out of your physical body, and that doesn't feel very good. So that makes perfect sense to me, and it's a wild experience to
100%. 100%.
Yeah. Oh, this is so fun. I loved having you, Tracy. I have so much fun talking to you, and I have so much fun working with you. And I would highly recommend, of course, anybody listening to this episode to book a session with you, because it has changed my life. I don't know if I even would have left my marriage, certainly not as soon as I had, if I had not gotten that insight. And now I'm like, that's a big life decision that I made. And I'm so glad I did. That insight really helped me a lot. Is there anything else that you want to share about different like things that you do or programs or anything, ways that people can work with you?
Yeah. So I will say, first of all, you can learn to tap into that infinite wellspring of knowledge, that higher aspect, because it is you. You can begin to see life from that higher perspective instead of constantly being stuck in survival mode with a frayed nervous system all the time. In my opinion, it's taking time to meditate, setting the intention that you want to hear from your higher self and your spirit guides, because they can see things from a different perspective, and learning how to listen to them, to discern the difference between the voice of your your human mind and your higher self mind or your soul. But you have to create space to hear them. And you do that by quieting your mind. So whether it's meditating for 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, or even just 5 seconds, it all can help. Just taking a breath and just clearing your mind just for even 5 seconds. So I do have some free and low cost courses on my website, tracyventura.com. And you can also get more information about my sessions there, the different types that I offer, the prices, as well as information on my hypnosis certification program to learn how to do what I do and learn how to connect to your higher self in that way. We do a ton of self-healing in my course so that you can be the one channeling your higher self when you're sitting across from a client too. So it involves a lot of self-healing work, self-digging work, learning hypnosis, and the business side of things. I literally give you everything and we walk through it in 6 months. And you will have your whole business set up, your practice sessions done, and ready to hit the ground running. We'll go through social media. We go through everything in my certification program. But in coming soon, I am going to be offering a course that teaches others how to do past life regression. And then another course called Lightworker Ascension Academy that teaches people, if they don't want to necessarily do hypnosis and just work with clients in healing. So whether you're a current healer or you want to learn more about healing, it's really that you're doing a lot of work on yourself in the beginning. Healer, heal thyself, right? Mm-hmm. And you're doing a lot of self-healing at the same time, learning how to then transfer those skills and those abilities into doing it with a client. So you can find out about all of this. And again, my free course is learning how to connect to your higher self, spiritual awakening boot camp, all of those on my website, tracyventura.com. And then I actually have some client sessions posted on my YouTube channel, and Avery's is going to be out on my Rumble channel. Her second session will be on my Rumble channel because it involved reptilians, and I don't want to get my YouTube channel taken down talking about things like that, so I'm not going to post that on YouTube, but you can find me on rumble.com under the name Woke Lightworker. That was my previous name I used, but that's my name on Rumble. So her session will be out there, but my other sessions are all posted on my YouTube channel. So if you want to take a look and see what an actual session really sounds like, you can go there and check it out.
Yes. And I remember watching some of those before I booked my first session and just thinking, this is amazing. I have to do this.
Yeah.
So yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming, Tracy. And I will make sure all of your links and everything are linked in the description so that everybody can connect with you, because I'm sure they're going to want to after this. But thank you for being here. It was so fun.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. And I always love talking about this kind of stuff.